GM, everyone. Ray Buckton here, your host for the RWA Pod. And today we are going to be doing something super special. We're going to be diving in to yet another phenomenal RWA project participating in the RWA Pod. I'm joined here today by Alexander, aka Rex from Driven. Rex, how are we doing today, man?
Doing great. Thanks for having me. I've been excited for this one.
Absolutely, man. I've very much been looking forward to it. As someone who never formally went down kind of the gearhead automotive rabbit hole, I know you and I have had some phenomenal conversations, and you really red pilled me in terms of bringing vehicles on chain, which makes sense for some collectibles. You can see I got my little pudgies here, so I'm a little bit biased there. But vehicles have a little bit more utility than fun little penguins. So for folks who didn't grow up playing, let's say like Fast and Furious or Gran Turismo, or like myself, didn't go down that automotive rabbit hole, I would love, Rex, if you can help them understand why JDM cars matter so much in general, and what makes these vehicles more than just something you can hop into and like take up to the bar or the grocery store.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the best way to put it is JDM cars are the classic cars of our generation. So JDM stands for Japanese domestic market. These are generally vehicles that really only existed in Japan, weren't exported much outside. Some of them made their way to Europe or Australia, didn't make their way to the US. And so we grew up watching them in the Fast and Furious movies or playing them in Gran Turismo or a variety of other games, always, wanting one. I like having posters on our walls, and those were what we strived to achieve one day when we reached success. But now that that day's here and those vehicles can be exported, or I should say imported into the US, now that they're 25 years old based off of the 25-year law. The demand is extremely high for them. And the other interesting thing is there's a lot of like really rare special editions. So, those folks that know about NFTs and, that whole like market dynamic that really exists quite a bit in the world of JDM cars. So, you can get, the base model of a car, which is still highly collectible, but then there's some vehicles where there may only be 100 of a specific model made. So those are extra special, extra collectible. So yeah, really it comes down to the fact that our generation isn't looking for the old Chevy Bel Airs or the hot rods that our parents were into, or maybe even like the, Camaros, Mustangs, and Chevelles. And so, our generation really has a passion for these Japanese sports cars.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I am familiar with Initial D, for example, like the anime, right? And that's very like Japanese centric racing culture. Rex, you mentioned something very interesting there that I personally wasn't aware of. You mentioned a 25-year kind of barrier that exists. So can you walk us through, why did you start here? Was it that 25-year kind of cutoff? And what other unique opportunities exist in that market, for example? Because as I mentioned, I'm very unfamiliar with this, so I'd love to kind of go a bit further down that rabbit hole.
Mhm. Yeah, so the 25-year law was, from what I understand, due to like emissions laws and differences between Japan and the US. And so that's where a lot of the emission laws start to become less of an issue when you're looking at older cars. And then I think there's also a component of trying to limit the number of vehicles that were being imported to the US so that would kind of bolster the US domestic manufacturing. What was the second part of your question?
Yeah, I was just curious in terms of like the time frame, the 25 years, and what other opportunities might exist in this market. So I guess that it would make sense to kind of more frame the question in terms of kind of the numbers surrounding the industry, right? Because I know that you can have incredibly expensive automotives. You mentioned also collections that maybe just have 100 of them, and naturally scarcity can drive value, but that's not always intrinsically the case. So as someone who's very close to this industry, what does the collector car market look like today? And what is the kind of size and scope and scale we're looking at here?
Yeah, in the US alone, the collector car market's about $100 billion industry. So, I mean, compared to some other industries, that's not insanely huge, but, there's still quite a big pie out there for us to, dip our finger into and start to cut off some sizable slices. Yeah, so I think that there's quite an opportunity, and that's just for collector cars. You start to look at car culture, motorsports, aftermarket, hobbyists, that sort of thing. And we're getting into over $1 trillion market. So it's huge when you factor in all of the components, all facets of car culture.
Absolutely. And then even $100 billion is a massive market, all things considered. I know in RWA, we talk a lot about the 300 trillion opportunity of bringing real estate on chain, but that's such a mind bogglingly large number. I think anyone listening would be happy to have even just a single billion, a humble $1 billion, right?
Yeah.
A huge opportunity for sure. And I'm really interested, like Rex, what does bringing this JDM cars, automotive culture on chain, what does that do? What problems does that solve specifically, that when you have these assets on like a centralized database or when they're off chain, that doesn't satisfy?
So I could answer this question from a few different perspectives. First is the obvious RWA sort of investment opportunity. Most of the cars that we are, or all of the cars that we're looking at adding to the collection, are on the higher echelon of JDM collector cars. So like you can import something like, for example, a Toyota JZX100, very popular for drifting, and you can probably get your hands on a really nice one for $40,000. Um, but the ones that are really going to see price appreciation, um, like a good example would be sort of the halo car, the hero car of this genre, is the R34 GTR from Nissan. These were manufactured from 99 to about 2002, if I remember correctly. And on the low end, you're going to spend $150,000 on one. For one of the more special editions, like there's something called the Nismo Z-Tune or the M-Spec NER, these you're looking at easily $500,000. And the price appreciation of this echelon of cars, we're probably seeing about, on average, maybe a 15 to 20% increase per year. With, when there's a dip in the market, they're not usually hit very badly. They have a pretty steady upwards trajectory. So that's the one side of these, highly collectible vehicles that the average person can't necessarily afford themselves, that we're giving them an opportunity to become a co-owner in. And unlike some other RWAs, maybe it's more like analogous to a stock, and you open up your wallet and you check the performance and you're like, oh, sweet, I'm up today. Or, really just looking at the asset performance. In this case, we're offering opportunities to enjoy that car in, enthusiast context. So there will be opportunities to come and drive the car or go out for some hot laps on track. You'll be, when you come to the facility or any of the events that the cars are featured at, you're treated like a VIP as one of the owners. And there's other opportunities to monetize these vehicles, which I'm sure we'll get into in a little bit. So the cars themselves can be like yield-bearing assets in a way. Then there's other things that we have on our roadmap, such as the ability to put pretty much any car on chain. And that isn't necessarily like fractionalizing it and then selling it to all your friends or whatever, but more a matter of treating it as an on-chain registry. So most car enthusiast communities, especially focused on certain models, have registries already. It's kind of a tried and true business model where you put all the data about your car into a database, and then you can get some, I guess you can glean different aspects of its rarity, or how many of these cars are still left on the road. And the GTR community actually has a really, really robust, not on-chain registry, standard database registry. So by taking this and putting it on chain, we can again kind of treat these like NFTs. You see all the traits and the rarities and things like that. Well, a good example would be if I were to put my car on chain, it kind of is treated like 23andMe. So like when you submit your DNA, the more people that do it, the more accurate the information about your lineage comes to light. Similarly, as people are adding their cars to this on-chain registry, you can start to see like, oh wow, I've got, there was only, like in my case, there was only about 7,000 of my car made, and of those 7,000, there's only so many left on the road, and there's only so many that had, that were pearl white with ABS and limited slip differential and 5-speed. And you're like, you can eventually get to the point where it's like, wow, I actually have one of 150 of these that are still in the world. And then, of course, we can use that to unlock a bunch of other really cool features that will benefit car culture. So that takes me to my next product that we have on the roadmap. And this is really bringing the culture itself on chain. So we're in the process of building out some systems where people can effectively tokenize and manage car clubs and events. And then that creates an opportunity to then spread it through the culture, through the communities, and also onboard people into Web3 using this technology in a way that actually provides real world benefit. So it's not just real world assets, it's real world problem solving.
I absolutely love that. And that makes a ton of sense. It reminds me a bit of many years ago in beer culture, there was an app called Untapped that got wildly popular,
I'm
for that
familiar with it.
exact reason. You can unlock your beers, but also set up events where your friends meet and that sort of thing. So love that approach, and love that you're bringing not just the automotives on chain, but the culture itself. But now you've got me really curious. I'm going to have to check my car and see. It's not rare, not expensive, but as someone who's not a car guy, I'm not too discerning. But it would be really cool if it's one of at least a couple thousand out there. So it's super exciting stuff. I'm really curious, as well, Rex, as I'm doing my research, as someone who's kind of coming from the outside of the culture I've noticed there's a couple different elements working within the driven ecosystem. So there's driven culture, driven vehicles, and also rev hard motors. I saw those logos pretty frequently. Can you please explain how those kind of work together, and how important is this physical aspect that you're mentioning where people can go and drive the cars, experience the actual vehicles themselves, etc.?
Yeah, so the driven culture is sort of the top of the funnel. It's our content marketing platform, and it's our way to get in front of, the wider automotive enthusiast audience. They already consume a ton of car content, automotive YouTube channels, and even like TikTok accounts and Instagram accounts just turn crazy numbers, as far as engagement and eyeballs. And, there's a lot of interest in motorsports and the news within this industry. We're building driven culture to be something that speaks to all automotive enthusiasts, gets them familiar with the brand, and kind of meets them where they're at, or on the social platforms that they already frequent, and provides value in the form of entertainment and information. And from there, we can bring them down the funnel as they become more exposed to the ecosystem into our app, which is driven vehicles. And that's where they'll discover the RWA opportunities to buy fractional shares of rare collector cars, and then start to see all of the other features like those that I just mentioned. So yeah, I call it content marketing, but I think maybe that's underselling it. It's really, a business in its own right, just producing content. And then, as I mentioned, Driven Vehicles is the app, and our partnership with Rev Hard Motors, that is my co-founder's JDM dealership and importing service out of Denver, Colorado. And they're integral to making sure that we've got the knowledge and infrastructure in place to be able to source, import, and custody the cars that we're talking about. Without having that level of expertise, trying to navigate how to import a car or where to even find it in the first place, making sure that you're not either breaking the law or just getting hosed by somebody who's selling you a false bill of goods is very, very important. So we feel very fortunate to have my business partner Josh, who's got over a decade experience importing these vehicles in our corner to make sure that the logistics is covered.
I love that. No, that makes a ton of sense. Something you said, Rex, meeting people where they are is absolutely massive for RWA. We're seeing that more and more on chain with the idea that there are ecosystem tokens, which I know you guys have, which we'll get into. And people really want to take exposure to those, compared to the longer term lockups that are very legitimate and interesting and yield generating. The Web3 culture is a little different. So kind of meeting different groups where they are in terms of what they're interested in and what they expect is essential. Huge shout out to your co-founder and your friend there. I know that's got to be quite an interesting situation. International shipping is not as easy as some people think. You can't you either buy it successfully and you broke the law, or you bought it successfully and it's just like a container ship full of lemons, and that's not what you need, right? Maybe
Yeah,
valuable, not a car.
Fun little anecdote on this. A lot of people don't know there are a number of ports in the US that you cannot import a car complete. So you would actually have to remove the engine and ship the engine and the car itself separately. And if you get caught importing a full car that can effectively drive right off the ship, you can get in big trouble for that. And there are other parts where that's not an issue. So you have to know where to import them from.
No, absolutely. And nothing like getting to that literal last mile of shipping and you have to Flintstones your collectible car off of the container
Mhm.
ship. That's very interesting to know. And I can only imagine as a history nerd, the context and stories behind why that is the case. But it's that kind of knowledge that really makes you guys the experts and what makes this kind of configuration super interesting. And what got me really excited is Rex, you and I were talking a number of months ago and you shared that, hey, we're actually tokenizing Paul Walker's 1999 Ferrari 360 Modena, which is super exciting. Not a JDM car, which is fine because it's still super cool. How did you guys get your hands on that? Could you tell us the story of how that worked?
Yeah, I mean, I think we got really lucky is the the long and the short of it. But yeah, since this project's inception, we wanted to tie into pop culture something that even if you weren't a car person necessarily, that you would have some level of familiarity and sort of positive association with. So we've started out with our ecosystem token, which we'll get into here in a little bit, which is inspired by Paul Walker's character from the Fast and Furious franchise, Brian O'Connor. His nickname was Buster, and that nickname was a kind of like an insult at first that then became like a term of endearment in a sense over the course of his character arc. And I think in a sense, all of us here in crypto, we kind of come in at the bottom, hoping for some wins and some gains, and eventually, if we're playing our cards right, we find that way. And when we were looking for our initial investors, to kind of get things up and running, we were connected with a gentleman who is actually a professional NFL player, and he has a super impressive car collection. He's a big JDM fan himself and is extremely well connected in the automotive aftermarket industry. Reading through everything, he's like, I really like what you're doing, but did you guys know that I own Paul Walker's Ferrari? And we're like, okay, did not know this. He's like, well, what would you say if, because you guys need a car to get things up and running, what would you say if, as part of my investment in the company, I offer the car and as a sort of in-kind investment, and that's how we wound up with it.
That is super cool. I love those kind of serendipitous kind of situations and then stories. So like that, it's a one of a kind. It's a one of one. And I love the analogy you made of kind of fan fiction and carrying forward that narrative. Because as I mentioned, I'm not a gearhead, but when I saw Paul Walker's car, I'm like, oh, from the movies? That's cool. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So I love that, man. And so for someone again who's not super down the rabbit hole of automotive, so can you walk us through the actual mechanics of driven? So like when I buy a fractional share of one of these automotives, am I actually buying the underlying vehicle? Can I go and like just say, hey, I'm taking custody of the tailpipe, or how does that configuration work?
Not exactly. So the way it works is every car that we bring into the collection is placed on the balance sheet of a DAO that's registered in Wyoming. So think of it like, if you were to become partner in an LLC, you effectively, part of your net worth would be considered what's on the balance sheet of that business. So, and therefore you can also generate revenue under using those assets that can go back to those shareholders. So what you're doing is you're opting into a decentralized autonomous organization that owns that asset. And then you are part of a kind of a close-knit community of co-owners who then determine what to do with the car, how to manage it. Maybe there are opportunities that are presented to maybe, let's say movie studio reaches out and wants to feature Paul Walker's Ferrari in the new upcoming Fast and Furious movie. Well, we can then propose that to the community of co-owners and they can vote on whether or not, they want to roll it out of our garage and put it on the road and maybe accept a little bit of risk, but also generate some revenue from it. So that's the way that we've found that we can legally, within the jurisdiction of the U.S., be able to offer exposure to these vehicles.
I love it. It makes a lot of sense, and I'm glad that funny folk like me can't show up and say like, "Well, I own 1/80th of this vehicle, and that's about the size of the back left tire, so I'm just going to take this home with me." I think that the configuration you described makes a lot more sense.
Mhm.
And so I'm interested as well, would love to talk a little bit about this token that you mentioned, the Buster token. I was doing some research on your website and you call it like a govern meme token. So I think it's a really interesting blend between kind of the utility of the governance and just kind of the enjoyment that, speaking with you, I can tell that you and the Driven organization, you really want folks to derive from interacting with the ecosystem. So can we dive in a little bit? Would love to know about the Buster token, kind of how it fits and functions within the overall ecosystem.
Yeah, so we took kind of a different tack than I think a lot of RWA companies do when it comes to our ecosystem token, and mainly it came down to the fact that I think a lot of RWA projects and companies are, they're pretty like corporate in how they present their offerings, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think it fits with whatever the asset class they're serving is, but in our case, the automotive world, motorsports, car culture, it's really fun. It's really dynamic. A lot of the people are just like really oddball people that choose to dump their life savings into their car rather than a 401k or something. And so there's an aspect of fun that we wanted to bring into our ecosystem token. So that's why it's kind of meme coded, as I like to say. We've got our mascot. We post memes and images centering around our Buster character, but at the end of the day, it functions as a governance token. So that's what gets you access to our platform. That's what unlocks certain features and the ability to earn rewards and participate in different activities. So there's, you know, a lot of people say, you can add a utility to a meme coin. Well, in our case, it's baked in from the very beginning. So hence a governed meme coin.
I love that term, the govern meme coin, which governments can be a bit of memes. Memes can transform into governments. So knowing that it kind of
This is
works
true.
both ways is exciting. And I think it really speaks to a lot of what you're targeting here, Rex, with the idea that there is automotive culture that's already extant. You're not starting from nothing and kind of creating a rallying point around the enjoyment that people want to derive from that culture is really significant. I want to kind of take it back a little bit and then shift the focus from the Buster token kind of back over to kind of the underlying asset here. One of the things you also mentioned on your website is solving the idle asset problem. And when I read that, something kind of clicked in my mind. I think idle assets, well, cars go, so they're rarely idle. But what you mentioned just in this interview kind of real nailed it for me. If I had Paul Walker's Ferrari, I would be white knuckling the thing, driving it, going like the speed of my grandma, terrified to even have a small bug land on it and then chip a minuscule piece of paint, right? So with that said, it makes sense that when folks invest in these high value automotives, there's going to be more of a association and understanding of the risk of taking this automotive, out into the world. So can you talk a little bit about the idle asset problem and how Driven helps these automotive investors who maybe already have an existing automotive portfolio potentially generate income and leverage this underlying asset that is their vehicle?
Yeah. So, speaking to what an idle asset is, and something that really just is going to appreciate in value and isn't going to generate revenue for the holders. So, in our case, these sort of high profile vehicles, there's a lot of opportunities to generate revenue off of them. The easy example here would be just creating content for YouTube and for social media, and you build a following, you build uh, uh, like impressions, you build sponsorships around these, and that can generate revenue just from creating video content around each car. In fact, this has become like a really big business model on YouTube, where automotive YouTubers will get a car and they'll create a whole series of videos around it that get, millions of views, but then they'll take it a step further and they'll actually turn that car into like a merchandising opportunity. So then they'll have like, say, merch apparel. There's one of my favorite YouTube channels. They have everything from blankets featuring their cars that sell out in 2 minutes to, to hoodies and posters and what have you. We're looking at turning them into a collection of like die-cast cars and models. And we can even then, we actually have a few video game partnerships in the works where our car collection will then become in-game assets. So if you own a full share of the car, you'll get automatic asset access to that car and all of our partner video games. But for everybody else, they would have to pay, 10, $15, whatever it happens to be, to drive Paul Walker's Ferrari in game. That creates revenue back to that DAO that holds that car. And then, of course, working with movie studios, musicians who want to maybe feature it in their music videos. The possibilities are really endless of the types of things that we can do with these cars to generate revenue. But of course, like you said, there is an aspect of risk in taking the cars out. I mean, a car needs to be driven to be maintained. You can't just put it under a car cover for, 20 years and expect it to not disintegrate. There is inherent risk, just like there is with any investment, especially as us crypto folk know. But so we've got to take the cars out. But these also create opportunities for the co-owners of the car to come out on specific days where we take the car out, where they could drive it or go on a ride along. And then we'll also be taking them to events. For example, we have a connection with a motorsport festival. I think they put on 6 events a year around the country called Slush Motorsports. And these are car shows where it's not just a bunch of people getting together, their cars are parked and they walk around and take pictures. The idea of these events are to be able to enjoy these cars in their, natural habitat, on track, take them drifting, drag race them. And so this also presents an opportunity for our members to come down and, go for a hot lap on track with us. And then we're also in the process of trying to secure a facility at COTA, the Circuit of the Americas in Austin, right at the track. So then we'll have even more opportunities to take the car out on track and, really give people the chance to experience the car that they are a co-owner of and not just follow it on social media and, check their asset performance in their wallet.
Absolutely, and I adore that. As you can motion to my little guys here, where are they? There on the shelf, right? Having these little physical things makes it real, right? The idea that it is a physical item, not just something that exists kind of intangibly out there in the ether, is absolutely huge. So I love the idea of it being a interactive sort of touch point that you were mentioning with the slush festival, right? People are able to go out and actually utilize these things. I know my father-in-law would be over the moon to be able to take one of these hot laps, for example, right? I think it makes a lot of sense. I'm curious as well, because I can kind of see how this could be a benefit, but with the collector car market being like traditionally illiquid, right? Like I have to go out, I have to source these sorts of things. I have to find like who wants to buy this thing. Where do I even go? How do we avoid some of the situations that you were mentioning earlier, right? You don't want to get scammed. You want to have like sell your car to someone and turns out there's an issue. How can asset tokenization for automotives and automotive culture potentially make these assets more liquid and dynamic? I'm really curious how you see the market formation kind of evolving around what you guys are doing.
So and beyond the one car, one owner problem that we're solving, then allows us to create liquid markets for all sorts of enthusiast vehicles. And not only is this something where we're just going to be bringing in, let's say a car every month or every couple of months into our collection, but we can actually then take this as a service that we can go to, let's say, the Jay Lenos of the world or the Jerry Seinfelds who have huge car collections, who are trusted individuals, and say, hey, you've got your collection here sitting idle. You could use our platform to generate revenue by turning them into liquid assets and then earning trading fees on the volume that's generated from the tokenized either individual cars or tokenizing your whole collection or portions of your collection. So this is one of the things that I think is going to be really popular because, for example, in my town, there's a local collector who has, I want to say, 150 collector cars that are sitting in a warehouse, and they maybe bring 1 or 2 of them out to car shows every once in a while. And unless you're talking to the person driving the car, you'd never know this collection exists. It's not really open to the public. So in this case, we will connect with trusted collectors and then give them this opportunity to then turn their collection into liquid assets. So there's so many opportunities in this relatively large market to in a sense, sort of financialize these.
100%. I think that makes a lot of sense, right? I mean, we've seen access engendering sophistication in terms of financial products and services, throughout history, right? ETFs come along, investment exposure to S&P 500 increases, it becomes more salient for people's lives. You get more sophisticated products kind of evolving around that. And
Yeah.
with that
Oh, and
said,
if I can
oh,
jump off of that real quick, one of the things that we're looking at doing that I think could be really interesting is then, say we get a large collection of cars together, and we've got 5 or 6 GTRs, again, super popular collector car. We could then take all of those individual assets and turn it into almost like a GTR index fund, and the sky's the limit as far as the type of instruments or vehicles, pun intended, that we can turn these things into. So a lot of fun opportunities here.
love it. Currently, DAT stands for Digital Asset Treasury. I'm seeing soon we'll have a driven automotive treasury, right? Where we're just like aggregating all of these vehicles and creating, like you're saying, almost like an index. Really, yeah, my gears turning. Pun totally intended there. The idea of you buying, 99 out of 100 of a given, issuance of a vehicle could get super, super interesting for kind of controlling, that market, which I'm sure already happens with some, collections of investors or incredibly high net worth investors. They want to corner a given market, they'll buy 5 out of 6 or five out of five of vehicles that were manufactured. But naturally, folks like myself, I'm not quite in the position yet to be able to go out there and soak up the whole market for a given issuance of an automotive. I'm super stoked that you guys are involved in the RWA Pod. I know the Buster token is included in the RWA Pod, so I am very excited to be going further and further down the rabbit hole. And definitely for me, I'm a good driver, but I'll do the ride along instead of the actual driving myself. I trust you guys more than I trust myself in terms of the automotive culture side of the equation. But I'm really curious, being that you guys are in the RWA Pod, everyone who's participating is going to be able to get access to the Buster token and start going down their own RWA automotive rabbit hole. How do you guys see tokenization further democratizing access to this realm that seems like it's largely been relegated to comparatively high net worth individuals if you want to own one of these assets, right? How do you see the tokenization of automotives further democratizing on the scene that you guys are working in?
It's a good question. I think that the easy answer here is that there's so many people in this world that can't afford one of these high-end collector cars, and this gives them that opportunity to join a close-knit community of people that have a shared passion. So, there's almost a non-quantifiable component to it, but also I find that a lot of our audience, as I'm going out to car shows and telling them what they're doing or what we're doing, they already have some familiarity with Coinbase or Robinhood, or they do some level of investment themselves. And when I say, think of it like Robinhood, but instead of buying shares in Tesla, you can buy a share in an actual collector car and then get all these cool benefits on top of it. So the interest is definitely there for people to look at these just even from an investment standpoint. And kind of checks a lot of boxes for sort of this younger demographic of investors and enthusiasts. Hopefully that answers your question.
Oh no, 100%. It definitely does. I mean, especially as the landscape evolves, people can have more diverse interests. Things are more connected. The idea that you can own a fraction of something and enjoy that and experience that, not just own a small sliver of it, it does make it more real. And I think you really spoke to the kind of shift in the zeitgeist, right? The newer
Yeah.
generation of investors who want to try before they buy, even if that's just like ride along with your friend Rex over at the test track, right? And be like, hey, I own a piece of this. This is really cool.
Yeah. And if I could can kind of take it from the other perspective too, you were mentioning how our token is available within the RWA pod. The hope is that those that aren't really big automotive enthusiasts will also, kind of look into what it is that they hold some tokens for, and then understand like, wow, this is actually a pretty good opportunity for me to maybe, hedge some of my investments, because as I mentioned, collector cars, when the rest of the market's crashing, generally they actually stay pretty strong as far as resilience, because people are buying these rare cars even in bear markets. So we hope that we can appeal just as much to the, like RWA investor or crypto investor or even traditional investor as we do to the automotive enthusiast who, implicitly understands everything that we're doing. I think that the opportunity is definitely there.
Absolutely, and it's a huge opportunity to kind of convert people who weren't previously, gearheads or deep down the automotive rabbit hole to just start taking that journey. I'm definitely kind of proof in the pudding there. I mean, I'm the host of the RWA Pod, so I want to know what's happening in the pod naturally. But I have to say, what you guys are doing at Driven, we've known each other previously from just speaking about RWA and tokenization. It's what you guys are doing have really stood out to me as something genuinely new and exciting, and taps into a really rich component of specifically American culture. It's a global culture, right? I mean, we're talking about JDM vehicles, but for the US culture, we're a very car centric country,
Mhm.
you could say. So I found it fascinating. So definitely working on me. And I'm curious as well, with all the opportunities that have been presented through bringing these vehicles on chain, how have you guys navigated kind of the challenges that you found around, like you were saying, custody, valuation, kind of building trust around what you're doing? Naturally, you mentioned Web3, and in Web3, we're all about trust but verify. So how have you guys navigated kind of that interpolation of cultures?
Yeah, so I think the valuation one is an important one to touch on, and it's a question I get asked often. How do you value these assets? And especially out of the gate, we have to start someplace. We need to start with parity to reality, and in order to do that, we can go one of two ways. In the case of something really unique like Paul Walker's Ferrari, this can't really be, you can't really take market data from all of the 360 Modenas and say, all right, this is the value of the car. So it requires regular appraising of the vehicle, likely on like a quarter by quarter basis to keep an updated price. But then other cars, going back to the GTR example, there is a lot of market data out there, and we can tap into some APIs of market data aggregators who then have every time a car changes hands, it marks the price. And we can even get really granular as to like which year, which color, which spec it is, and compare it only with the most relevant vehicles. And that allows us to set that initial valuation. I'd say one of the issues that has been often talked about in the RWA space is, okay, now that it's tokenized, how do you keep that asset in line with reality? Or do you just let it turn into another speculative asset? And now my, $250,000 Ferrari that I own a share of has gone to, $1 billion, in market cap. Is that really in line with reality? Can you actually get that out of it? And so one of the mechanisms that we're looking at doing, and I'll kind of preface this with like early on, there's going to be some level of experimentation to find that right formula, and we'll also be tapping into the community of co-owners to sort of come up with unique strategies. That's part of the fun of being a co-owner and being in these DAOs, is you can test out different strategies. So for example, one of the things that we'll be doing is setting up like a range trading bot that will keep the value of the vehicle on chain within a certain percentage range of what it's worth in the real world. And so if people are speculating, or if they're, just booms in popularity, and we've set our threshold at 25% above the appraised value, once it passes above it, then we will sell some shares from our treasury to bring it back below, and vice versa. If it drops below the real world appraised value of the car, we'll buy shares and bring it back up. So it keeps it somewhat pegged with reality. But hey, a community could just decide like, hey, let's take the cap off and see what happens. That's kind of the fun of crypto, is we can we can experiment all these different ways.
No, absolutely. You get the liberty to see exactly how far out of the bottle you want to let the genie. And that makes a lot of sense. It does kind of remind me a little bit, as you know, Rex, I'm a bit of a financial nerd. So it reminds me of the meticulous increase in the average stock price relative to earnings, right? So the earning per share kind of calculation. It's like, well, that's kind of gone up and up and up. And for some of these companies, it's just nosebleed wild valuations. It'll take you 40 years to justify that stock price if it's a one-to-one basis. Kind of talk about market sophistication, seeing that kind of thing play out in terms of valuations for the underlying vehicles makes a lot of sense. I think what you just described is a very prescient approach, right? You're trying to bring that price back into line with reality while also benefiting the overall DAO and the community, as a
Yeah.
whole.
Yeah. And as the market data comes in, or as the car is uh, appraised and the value goes up, it also moves that up too. So it's not like you're just stuck in this range forever. It could continue to go up year over year, quite significantly.
Absolutely, 100%. And as you mentioned, it's almost expected given the durability of the automotive market. So, man, this has been great. So, JDM, the cars, they make a lot of sense. Paul Walker's Ferrari, super fascinating. Where do you guys see this going next? Just like, let's say the next 12 to 36 months in terms of platform expansions, long term vision. What do you guys see as the next chapter for Driven?
Well, I think we'll be continuing to focus on JDM cars in the short term, since it's what we know well, and we know that there's an audience and a market for it. We probably will be branching out into some other vehicles, likely vehicles that have some sort of historical or cultural significance to them. So, picture, you know, a car that Lewis Hamilton drove in F1, or has some sort of racing heritage to it, or a car that was used in a movie, like another Fast and Furious type of vehicle, if we can get our hands on one. Um, and so to kind of broaden our offering of the vehicles. Beyond that, we are going to be launching additional collections and additional ways to tokenize. So as I mentioned, there's this sort of like DIY tokenization where people can register their cars on chain. We're also going to be creating a limited run of special edition cars every year that we import, something that doesn't necessarily have that high dollar value of like a, $500,000 GTR, but something that we can bring in and turn into its own collectible, in its own right. So one of the sort of popular things in the automotive world right now is retro modding. So company will specialize in a specific type of car and then build out a sort of a production line to make this, 30-year-old car basically brand new and a special edition. So we're looking at doing that. And that's something that our community can effectively uh, like contribute to get the inventory together and the production in place, and then they'll have a guaranteed ROI on all of the cars that are sold. We're also going to be dabbling in RWA for real estate and property. So, as I mentioned before, we're looking at getting that facility at Coda, and that as well will be an RWA that our community can become shareholders in, and potentially, put together these sort of satellite car culture facilities around the country, maybe even around the world. And we want to have, a fairly large footprint as we grow. And then getting really heavily involved in events, car clubs, media. So, we really are looking to touch every aspect of car culture and not just be some sort of niche, like tokenized car only platform. We think that we have, especially with blockchain technology, there's so many problems to be solved. And I think we've got the kind of vision to be able to inject this technology into various realms of automotive culture in a way that really adds value and also proves that blockchain is, can solve real world problems, isn't just about, like the Solana casino or kind of this abstract idea of digital money. It can actually be used to address issues that people face every day.
100%. I absolutely love that. So the retrofitting or retro modding component sounds super fascinating to me as a history nerd. So you'll have to be doing some donuts and a pre-Model T that's been retrofitted. Looking forward to that one.
I don't know how long it'll be until we get into a Model T, but hey, you never know.
I fear we got time, man. We're at the inflection point of the modernization of capital markets. We got at least a decade to play around with.
Mhm.
But I absolutely love the trajectory. And I think they say thinking big is the way to go. And then automotive culture is definitely huge. So tackling not just one segment of that, I think is the prescient move. So Rex, this has been phenomenal. I am mega bullish on Driven and the work that you're doing. Like I said, I'm very thankful for you giving me an opportunity and an entry point to go down the gearhead and automotive rabbit hole. I think there's some very exciting things happening, especially for those who are participating in the RWA pod and are going to get their hands on some Buster tokens. With that said, just to leave our audience, whether they're automotive enthusiasts, folks who are in Web3, or just kind of stumbled across this content and found it interesting, how can people get involved in Driven, Rex? What's your call to action? How do we get folks started kind of going down this rabbit hole?
Yeah, I would say first thing is to just follow us on social media so you are able to get all of our content as it comes out. Secondly, we are building very closely, kind of hand in hand with the vision of Base and Coinbase. We think that having our app available within the new Base app is going to be one of the easiest ways to onboard people. So, they can eliminate having to worry about, transaction fees or seed phrases. They just get the Base app. They, load up some USDC from their bank account and then go to our app and have fun. So my suggestion is, try to get into the Base app as early as you can. I know right now it's invite only, but we will be, as we're able to, be offering the invite codes to our community members so they can get in and be some of our earliest users. You can also use the Driven Vehicles app on your normal web browser at DRVN VHCLS, like the hat says. Think of it like a license plate, no vowels, .app. So drivenvehicles.app. Yeah, we've got a Discord community with about 1,000 members. If you do the Discord, definitely come and join us. That's also where you're going to be able to get those invite codes for the Base app, so you can really experience our app the way it's meant to be. Yeah, and just if you've got some car friends, please send them our way. Everybody knows at least one person who's automotive obsessed. So definitely let them know what we're doing. And yeah, if you do end up with some Buster from your RWA Pod activities, please do come check us out and, kind of understand what you're holding. Because, I think that the long-term trajectory of where we're going is, really has no limits. And, we hope that you, as a new Buster holder, will, kind of, let's say, get bitten by the automotive bug and, come along for the ride.
100%. I love it, and I couldn't agree more. Definitely, folks, for you participating in the pod, keep those Buster tokens in the gas tank, because if not, you're probably just going to end up taking Uber, and I'll be riding with Rex, like I said, either in a Model T, the Ferrari, just any of these amazing options you guys have. But phenomenal stuff, Rex. Thank you so much, man. Phenomenal conversation. Really excited for what you guys are doing, Driven, and to continue to support, participate, and follow along. And definitely echo the sentiment. If anyone out there has not yet put their capital, made their USDC deposit into the pod, highly recommend doing so. 10, count them, not 1, not 5, 10 RWA tokens, including the Buster token from Driven. So thank you all so much, and happy tokenizing.